Welcome to another episode of Erik Wait Whiskey Studies, and in this video, I'm going to talk about the history of Glenkinchie Distillery, a few of their production distinctives, and do a review of the Glenkinchie 12-year-old single malt Scotch whiskey. So I visited Glenkinchie Distillery when I was studying at the Edinburgh Whiskey Academy. We did a tour with one of the instructors, and the distillery was under reconstruction, or at least the visitor center was. They had a lot of scaffolding up and stuff like that. But since then, the visitor center has been rebuilt. So I'm looking to go back to the distillery in July 2024, and really looking forward to it. Now, I reviewed a couple different Glenkinchies, the Amontillado cask and a distiller's only edition. That's a little higher ABV. I've only had before a little sample bottle of this when I first started out studying whiskey back in 2016. And what I've learned is you really don't get a full sense of a whiskey just from one of those sample bottles. You really need to go at least halfway through a bottle, as I have with this one. But before I get into this, here are my notes on the history of Glenkinchie Distillery and a few of their distinctives. Glenkinchie Distillery is located in East Lothian, Scotland, about 15 miles from Edinburgh. The name Kinchie is a corruption of De Quincey, the original owners of the land. In 1825, John and George Wait opened Milton Distillery. In 1837, the Wait brothers opened a more substantial distillery nearby called Glenkinchie. In 1853, Glenkinchie Distillery goes bankrupt. It is sold to a farmer named Christie, who converted it into a sawmill. In 1881, a collective of Edinburgh-based investors, led by Major James Gray, reopens Glenkinchie Distillery. In 1890, Glenkinchie Distillery Company is founded. The distillery is refurbished and expanded. 1914, Glenkinchie Distillery forms part of Scottish Malt Distillers. In 1925, Scottish Malt Distillers merges with Distillers Company Limited. From 1939 to 1945, Glenkinchie Distillery is one of the few distilleries that remained active during World War II. 1968, Glenkinchie's floor maltings are decommissioned and converted to a museum. 1988, Glenkinchie is bottled as a single malt for Diageo's Classic Malt Selection. 1998, Glenkinchie Distiller's Edition with Amontillado cask finish is released. In 2007, Glenkinchie 12 and 20-year-old cask strength are released. In 2018, Diageo reveals plans to revamp the visitor center. Glenkinchie Distillery has the largest wash still in all of Scotland, and weighing in at 30,963 litres, the still was replaced in 2008, at which point the whole roof needed to be removed and the new still lowered in by crane. Only 250,000 bottles of Glenkinchie single malt are sold in a year, and given the 14 9-ton mashes that occur every week, along with the big stills, this means that the production quota for malting bottling for the year is completed in less than 3 weeks. The rest is used to fill quotas in one of Diageo's many blends. The Glenkinchie 12-year-old single malt Scotch whiskey. It's aged in ex-bourbon cask for 12 years. It's bottled at 43% alcohol by volume and sells for around $75 on average. So this whiskey really surprised me. When I first opened it, I didn't have real high expectations. It's lower ABV, it's a lowland distillery. Not too many people raving about lowland distilleries. I knew that it was a distillery that most of it goes into, blends and, probably has some E150 and a chill filtering and all that. All those things that we don't like. So I went into it with low expectations, and I actually found that this whiskey quite surprised me as to the quality and full flavor of this whiskey. Now, when I first opened it, when I had a neck pour, it came across as sort of like a Premier Cru Chardonnay from Burgundy. Very light creme brulee, light apples, light pear, very, 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 very crisp. Those are somewhat light whiskey with just that whiff of those sort of like, barrel char notes. Put the cork back in, came back to it 2 days later, and it's a completely different whiskey. It is now more like a California Chardonnay that has been barrel fermented and barrel aged. So a lot more of that oak influence than, say, your typical Burgundy. More, say, baked fruits, baked apple, baked pear, baked peaches or dried peaches, sort of a little pineapple juice of canned pineapples, definite butterscotch note, some vanilla, baking spice, a little bit of cinnamon. The creme brulee toastiness has now gone onto a full barrel char note. A little bit of that maltiness and just a hint of a floral note. On the palate, even though it's only at 43% ABV, it's got a lot of flavor going on there. Quite surprised. Doesn't necessarily have a huge transition from the front and the middle and the finish. What you get up front, when you get on the finish, is pretty much the same. A lot of butterscotch, dried apples, or an apple maybe cut it open and oxidized, sitting out on the counter table. Dried pears, dried peaches, there's butterscotch, the vanilla. It has caramel notes, whereas before, from the neck pour, it had sort of a creme brulee, that toasty, crusty part on the top of a creme brulee. Now it's gone into a full apple pie crust sort of character. There's a lot more going on there. The finish is moderate. It's not short, it's not long, it's sort of moderate. And pretty much, it's the same whiskey all the way through. It doesn't have a huge transition. It's not, say, a super complex whiskey. That being said, reading the label and knowing what I know about Glenkinchie Distillery, I didn't have real high expectations. And those lower expectations then allowed the whiskey to give me a greater impression and I think higher of it than I normally would have. So what would I give it in terms of score? Now I'm gonna go a solid, 86 points, so just slightly above average, a B, starting to head towards a B plus in terms of, grade scores. If you are a student of whiskey and you need to understand the whiskey, on the same path that I am, you need to understand the difference between an Islay peat and a Highland peat, an Orkney peat versus a Campbellton peat, all the variations. You need to understand the difference between sherry cask and bourbon cask and first fill and second fill, and on and on and on. To understand the regions, which are Campbellton or Speyside, you need to understand the lowlands. And I would say this is a classic representative of the lowlands. So if you're gonna study whiskey, not merely drink it and enjoy it, but if you're gonna study whiskey, study Scotch whiskey, be a student of the malt, this is a whiskey you gotta have. Maybe if you don't want to buy a full bottle, share a bottle with someone or something like that, but this is a bottle you gotta have in order to rightly understand the full range of what Scotland produces. All right, that's it for this video. If you subscribe to this channel, I want to thank you very much. If you've not yet subscribed, you like watching my videos, would greatly appreciate it if you would subscribe, ring the bell to be notified for when I go live or post a new video. And until next time, Slàinte. Hey, don't forget to subscribe and check out these other whiskey videos.